retirement of Australia's largest coal-fired power station will be delayed. Independent experts have warned that if Eraring plant closes as scheduled next year, it will likely result in blackouts. Albo and his fellow Green Left renewable fans may not want to hear it, but we can't keep the lights on without coal. Yet Liddell shut down, Hazelwood demolished, literally blown up. When Eraring goes, that's more than 25% of New South Wales' electricity needs gone. The past 2 summers, we've been told to delay non-essential energy use to avoid blackouts. Politicians urging us not to use the dishwasher. Ludicrous for 21st century Australia. So our first question for the jury is, should we stop closing coal-fired power stations? Joining me now live is Kevin Hogan, Shadow Trade Minister, up against Cate Faehrmann, New South Wales Greens MP. Hello to you both. Thank you so much for joining us on the panel this evening. Kevin, we'll start with you. The delay in closing Eraring, it pretty well confirms that we're not ready for a future without coal, right?
Danica, we're not. I mean, obviously, let me start by saying we're all committed to net zero 2050, so we need to lower emissions, but we also need to keep the lights on. So at the moment, if we rely too much of the grid on wind and solar, for example, let's look at a solar panel. A solar panel works on average, depending on the season, the length of the day, the weather, the cloud coverage, about 5 hours a day. And wind turbines onshore work about 25-30% of the time. Offshore's better. They work about 40 to 50% of the time. So you can't have a grid that is weather reliant. We've obviously opened the debate about nuclear and other forms. Hydrogen's been looked at, so we can cover what we call the base load, that we still have power when the sun isn't shining and the wind isn't blowing.
OK, Cate, Peter Dutton said this week that we can't shut down coal stations while renewables aren't capable yet of holding up the grid. Do you think he has a point?
Well, let's be clear. The coal-fired power stations aren't shutting down tomorrow. There has been this kind of staged exit. South Australia, for example, has had days where they have relied upon and had 100% renewable energy, right? Wind, solar. Here in New South Wales, we've got hydro. So let's be clear on that. Secondly, it's the commercial operators who are making the decision because coal is so expensive now. So they've got these ageing power stations. Most of them are 30 years old, but on their life, they've got to close at some point anyway. Plus, we've got this incredible, this technology that is working. So let's be clear, the companies are making the decision. If they're extended, guess who pays? The consumer pays. That's the law. So if these coal-fired power stations, for example, Eraring is extended, it's going to come across on people's electricity bills. It's the only way that they can keep it open. It's in the law. The consumer has to pay. So we don't need it. They're polluting the planet, they're bad for our health. Let's just get rid of them and let's go with this incredible technology that the rest of the world is embracing as well.
Kevin, what do you think about that? Because Cate raises a point that they're bad for the environment, they are pollutants. What are we going to do?
I mean, the point Cate made was that the generators themselves, the owners, Origin, for example, who owns Eraring, is choosing to close it down. She's right, they're choosing to close it down because it's not going to make them enough money. But they don't care whether the lights are on or not. They're about making money. It's about government needs to make sure that the lights don't go off. And the generator might say, well, we don't want to keep going with this asset because it loses money at certain times. The government therefore has to step in and say, but if you shut this down, right now, because of the lack of, we don't have battery technology that can make wind and solar work when they're not working. It's government's responsibility to make sure the lights stay on. I get that Origin don't care if the lights go on or off. They just want to make money. That's not government's responsibility. They need to make sure the lights go on. Eraring, I know the New South Wales Labor government are in negotiations with Origin over Eraring right now because if that shuts down next year, the lights will go off.
Well, Cate, can renewables keep the lights on?
The biggest thing when it comes to why there are blackouts is the transmission infrastructure, right? We've got this grid, we get storms, we get heat waves and we get fires. The transmission infrastructure can't survive some of these extreme weather events. So it's not just about coal-fired power stations. We've had blackouts before and all we've had is coal-fired power. That's something that the people who really don't want action, they don't want to see it fast enough, they're afraid of renewables. That's the argument they're using, but it doesn't stack up.
It does stack. Let's see how the jury are feeling. Sandra in the back row, how do you feel about us closing coal-fired power stations?
Well, it's like if you're going to knock down and rebuild a house and then you knock it down and go, oh, damn it, I've got nowhere to live. Would you do that? Would you destroy something before you've got a reliable source of power? And yes, South Australia managed, I think, for one day to provide renewable energy for the South Australian power needs. You can't rely on, and you're saying about the transmission lines. The transmission lines are the same, aren't they going to be the same lines that renewable energy uses as well? So you can't blame the blackouts purely on transmission lines and coal-fired power stations.
Right, OK. And what about you, Charlotte? How are you feeling about this?
Absolutely. I align with Cate. I think this idea that obviously it is the extreme weather events that impact the transmission lines, but the joy of solar and renewable is you can actually create power in your own home. Like, my hometown was devastated by floods and my family's solar-powered home was the only one in the whole town that had power during an extreme weather event. And we're going to be seeing more and more of these weather events. So not only does renewables stop polluting the environment, but it also allows consumers to actually be creating energy at their own homes and have access to that power.
Okay, and Pamela, what about you?
I think when you're looking at the future, there's a movement towards nuclear. So I think we have to consider that. And I think looking at the manic rollout of all these power lines and renewables is just a terrible situation. So I think we have to have a pause and stop and think about what we want to do in the future, and we have to keep the gas and the coal going in the meantime to keep the lights on. We can't
to keep the lights on.
Yes.
Kevin, I'll let you respond to that.
Well, look, firstly, I take the point about the solar, can work in those times, and I get that. Look, I've had solar on my own roofs for over a decade, so I get that. But I come back to the point that at the moment, solar, because of the lack of battery technology and the lack of we can't store it as well as we'd like to, average solar panel works for about 5 to 6 hours a day, and wind works anywhere from 25 to 50% of the day. So when they're working, they're great, but you can't, I believe, design a system around an intermittent energy or an intermittent generation source. So what do we look for? So I think we have to work out what is going to cover our base load until battery technology gets to the stage where we can store wind and solar when they're not working, which we can't yet. We have to look what's going to cover the base load. Now, at the moment, if you have pumped hydro, you're lucky. Like Norway has a lot of hydro, so they can get away with that. But every other country basically has either nuclear or coal, or a combination of both. And I get for clean technology, we maybe need to move more from coal to nuclear.
Well, there actually is a lot of pumped hydro potential, lots of projects coming online. People are looking at open-cut coal mines at the end of their use-by date. That's being used, for example, for pumped hydro. We are the highest per capita user of solar panels on our houses in the world. There's still a lot more uptake. There's such exciting things happening. And in terms of base load, pumped hydro, batteries, everything is starting to shift so massively. And again, we're not talking about every single coal-fired power station in the country closing tomorrow. Some are going out to 2035, even 2038. But this staged closure is happening regardless.
But the fact the retirement's been delayed, though, does that suggest that there are concerns?
So I think that what I have seen is that the security targets, in terms of energy security targets for New South Wales, say that we actually don't need to extend Eraring. I don't agree with that assessment, and have spoken with a lot of experts saying it's not needed. So that's still controversial. I don't think it is needed for base load. And to be honest, there's just a lot of projects in New South Wales caught up in the planning system. We need to try and fast-track those, get them online, and we can phase out coal-fired power stations sensibly to avoid the lights going out.
Is that a fair point? It's about investing in this renewable technology to make sure that we do have that energy source at the end of all this.
Well, Jess, I'll go to that, Danica, but Eraring can't close next year. I mean, if Eraring closes next year, we will have blackouts. But look, there will be technology that comes on, that will be increased battery technology, that will improve renewables. But right now, you cannot design an energy grid around intermittent power source. And pumped hydro, I think that the opportunities for that in Australia are very limited. We're a very dry continent. So the pumped hydro, I don't think, is a source. We're seeing the difficulties with snowy hydro. So we either have to keep the coal going as long as we can and switch to something like nuclear. OK, well, look, you've both had your say. It's now time to call on the jury. Jurors, you have 10 seconds to decide, should we stop closing coal-fired power stations?
Jury members, what have you decided? Okay, we've got 3 no's and the rest of you are yes. So let's start with the no's. Rob, why no?
Again, I think just to have the mix. I'm not comfortable yet. I want very much that we move towards a nuclear base load.
Yes.
It's in so many countries. I really want that through. And until I guarantee that that is going to happen, I believe we need to keep them open as long as possible.
Okay, and Mitch, you voted yes. Why?
Because nobody's addressed one of the most important things, and that's the jobs that rely on these coal power fire stations. And, you know, what's going to happen when they close these plants? The whole communities rely on them.
Yeah.
And the number of jobs that people are going to lose.
Yeah, look, that's a fair point, that the jobs. What about you, Danny? You also voted yes. Why?
Look, we hear a lot of reference to the lights going out.
Yeah.
Or let's keep the lights going. It's a much bigger issue than that. I mean, from my point of view, you've got industry situations that'll affect employment. You've got small businesses who won't have the incomes to keep their small businesses going. And you've got the mum and dad with the lights and the air conditioning as well, which gets mostly referred to. But I think it's the bigger issue that I feel very concerned about the power stations being closed down. It's a bit like being warned a mile out from going over a cliff and keep on driving. Like you just can't close down before you're ready to replace it.
Fair, and I'll hear from you, Arthur.
It has to be a gradual process, I think. So eventually, renewables will be the answer, but as long as it's done gradually over a period of time, so we can keep the lights on.
Yeah.
So that's my basic issue.
Well, it's all about Charlotte. Did you want to?
It's being done gradually. Like, I think everyone kind of can agree that it needs to be done gradually, as Cate so greatly pointed out. It is being done gradually. So I'm unsure why people want to stop closing them, because it is being done gradually.
Yeah. Well, that's the point that you were alluding to.
Absolutely. That's exactly what there's a plan, there's a roadmap, and it's all being mapped out, and nobody's kind of forcing closures at a particular time. They're not doing that. Again, it's a commercial decision.
Yeah. Well, look, it's a fascinating debate, and one we'll be looking forward to as we head towards a federal election. Kevin Hogan, Cate Faehrmann, great to speak with you both. Thank you so much for joining us on the panel this evening.
Thanks, Dan.
We'll come back to Australia shortly. Warren Mundine will join us later for what's set to be a fiery head-to-head clash on the Indigenous Welcome to Country debate. But first, it's game on in the United States. Super Tuesday turned into a Super Trump Day. Donald Trump is now officially running unopposed to be the Republican presidential nominee after rival Nikki Haley dropped out of the race.
They call it Super Tuesday for a reason. This is a big one. They tell me, the pundits and otherwise, that there's never been one like this. There's never been anything so conclusive.
A Trump versus Biden rematch seems inevitable. It's a big comeback, and it begs the question, how can a man accused of sparking an insurrection with multiple criminal cases and a literal mugshot hanging over his head still be popular enough to smash the Republican primaries? Is it a fluke, a bizarre stroke of luck, or something more calculated? Our next question for the jury: is Trump a political genius? Joining me is James Morrow, US reporter and Outsiders host here at Sky News Australia, who says yes, and he's up against Stephen Loosley, former Labor senator and fellow at the United States Study Centre. Hello to both of you. Thanks for joining us on the program this evening. James, how has Trump gotten this far? Is he a campaign mastermind? What is it?
Well, I think the thing, Danica, that you need to understand about Trump is that there's something about him that triggers his enemies so much that they wind up going to such wild extremes to stop him that it helps him. And just to pick up on one thing you said in your introduction, you talked about those court cases. Well, an awful lot of those court cases are nakedly political attempts. And I think Americans look at this and they say, come on, you're trying to get somebody on a fraud charge for taking out loans and paying them back. This is politics. This is not the American way.
Right. OK, well, that's an interesting point. Stephen, what do you think about that? Why don't you think he's a political genius, despite, as we've just said, all these criminal cases?
James would be on stronger ground if he was arguing that Homer Simpson should be recommended for the Nobel Peace Prize for Physics. I mean, Trump is no genius by any stretch of the imagination, by any criteria. For a start, if he were a political genius, he would have won a second term. He would have beaten Joe Biden last time around. As it is, he's now bracketed with the first-term presidents such as Herbert Hoover or Jimmy Carter. And that clearly is a case of mediocrity. It's easy for the Trump NZ position to say that the charges against him, 91 of them, by the way, across multiple jurisdictions, state and federal, are politically driven. If you look at them, there's no way that Jack Smith, as the special prosecutor for the Department of Justice, is politically driven.
What do you think about that, James?
No, I mean, look, without getting into the weeds of these cases, and I'm sorry, Stephen, these are political cases. Letitia James, the Attorney General of New York State, ran for office. You run for office in the states for Attorney General. And she said in speeches, we're going to go get Trump. Vote for me and we'll get Trump. And what did she do? They brought a case where they said that his 100-room club in Florida was not worth what he said to the banks, and therefore this was fraud. But, you know, on the question of his political acumen...
Can you also argue that the New York judiciary is politically driven?
It is.
Well, that is an extraordinary circumstance which will be overturned on appeal. There's no question about that.
So, you know, these are the same. We've seen these cases, the Colorado
you didn't want
case.
to get into the
Supreme
weeds,
Court,
but you are actually deep in the weeds already.
Well, no, I'm afraid not, because, you know, the other things that he's done is he's realigned, I think, the Republican Party from being the party of, you know, big business, country club capital to being a party that's looking after working Americans. He called time on the globalist free trade agenda, which was shipping jobs overseas from NAFTA onwards, and both parties were into that. He's the only one who wants to secure the southern border. You've got Joe Biden out there just hours ago apologizing for calling somebody illegal.
It is Trump's insistence on the current Speaker of the United States House of Representatives that the bill that was agreed in the United States Senate on a bipartisan basis with Senator James Langford, a Republican of Oklahoma, very prominent in the heavy lifting, that would have addressed the border crisis, which needs to be addressed. It's Trump's pressure on the Republicans in the United States House of Representatives that stopped that bill even appearing before the House. And you turn it around and say somebody else is responsible?
That bill very quickly would not do anything to actually stop people coming across. It would only process them into the system quickly.
All right, let's get some jury feedback. Mitch in the front row, do you think that Trump is a political genius?
The first time he ran for political office, he was able to win the highest office in the land without any experience. Like the number of times we've heard people say, it's over for Trump, there's no way he can win, and he's proven them wrong time and time again. And I suspect he's going to do the same in November.
OK, Steve, do you think that Trump's a political genius?
I think you've got to categorise the genius part first, because there's no doubt that the choices for the American public are pretty limited at the moment between someone who's quite clearly senile and frail, and a very arrogant man who's, because of his business background, is going about politics in a completely different way. But that is his genius. Yeah. And I think that he may very well be successful in this election because he appeals to a large number of the masses.
Pamela, do you think he's a political genius?
Even though he's a billionaire, he relates so well to the everyday American person, and he understands their issues and he addresses them and gives them what they want.
Yeah. Yes. What about Arthur next to you there?
I definitely don't think he's a political genius, but he is a master manipulator.
Right.
And pretty good snake oil salesman. So, and a lot of people buy that. So,
yeah,
he's pretty good at those areas.
Yes. That's good. James, get your response to that. It's quite a snake.
It's an interesting thing there. People, you know, look at him, and because he's got that kind of property developer sort of, well, he was a property developer. I mean, you know, I think it's in the audience, property developers, we all have some thoughts on that. But you know, of course, there's an attitude, a way that he does things that is so different to the formal political language. But that's, again, I think that's where the cut through is. Yeah. And, you know, obviously there's, you know, I'm not going to say that you defend his character on everything. You might not want him to look after your houseplants. But, in terms of the question here, is he a political genius? I'm sorry, but he has changed the game for American politics, I think, forever, and reconnected politics to the people.
Right, well, Stephen, but how can you argue with that? You can't deny, though, that he's really made an art out of political survival.
Well, he's brought his period as an Atlantic City wrestling promoter into the political arena. He knows how to cut through, and he taps into that grievance. I mean, it's a little bit like the Seinfeld episode where George Costanza's father introduces the notion of Festivus. There's always a grievance.
But Stephen,
is
there a grievance that people should have?
The simple fact of the matter is, Trump inherited a lot of money from his father, and he built his real estate holdings on that. What the court cases are showing, is that a lot of Trump's confected imagery is just that.
All right.
But very quickly, though, this idea that, he talks about playing into grievance, look at the America that people were inheriting in 2016, the shipping of jobs overseas, migration crises, other things. Shouldn't people feel a sense of grievance?
All right, we've got to wrap it up. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. We could go on for ages with this. This is a great debate. We love talking about Trump. You've both had your say. It is time to call on the jury. Jurors, you have 10 seconds to deliberate the following question. Is Trump a political genius? Okay, time is up. What is the jury's verdict? 4 no's. The rest of you believe that, yes, indeed, Donald Trump is a political genius. Rob?
Yes.
Why yes?
The runs are on the board, I must admit. And I think his genius is the fact that he's a politician who's not a politician. He has no filter. What he thinks, he says. It could be 3 o'clock in the morning and he's...
Well, we know that. He likes that.
And people resonate with that. I was in the States in 2019 and I was asking everybody, why do you like him? He's rich. He's not for you. He's not religious. Why does the common man like him? And he says... Every answer I got, he sticks up for us. He's sticking it to the liberal elites.
Yeah.
They believe that he's their man against the wokeness.
Well, that's what Pamela was saying earlier as well.
That's why.
Arthur, you're still maintaining that he's absolutely not a political genius.
Definitely not. But he's a good salesman. I'll give him that. And the American people, or half of them, buy it.
People do buy it. Is that what you're saying?
Of course. He's currently leading in the polls. So obviously he's doing something right.
Yeah, for sure. James, do you want to respond to that? He's obviously doing something right. Clearly it's resonating no matter what happens.
That said, though, I think that he's got a long hill to climb. I wouldn't believe the polls now because the Democrat ground game is going to be strong and they're raising more money.
Yes.
This race is not over.
It's not over. Stephen, last comments from you. Race not over?
Well, it's March and most Americans don't begin paying attention to the presidential contest until after their Labor Day in September. Joe Biden's fighting speech is the best since Harry Truman in 1948 and setting the touchstones of reference for this campaign.
OK, well, look, it's going to be a great race to November, isn't it? Looking forward to it. Stephen Loosley, James Morrow, thank you so much for joining us on the program.